Welcome back. Today, I want to do a quick review, talk about your exam. Remember, next Wednesday, we do not have a submitting. Next Wednesday, what you do is go directly to Canvas, use the lockdown browser, and do your exam. I am confident that you can finish the midterm in 20 minutes, half an hour. Some people, most of the people in the past, finish quickly. However, you have a full hour, 60 minutes, plus 15 minutes for the configuration, the webcam, and all the things that you need to do because the exam is online. So you have time. Just remember, no submitting. We are not going to be here. This is our only meeting this week. Next Wednesday, go to Canvas, follow the instructions, do your midterm. Remember, midterm, 25% of your grade. You still have time to ask questions, not only during the review today, but tomorrow by email or something, office hour with me or with the TA. Be sure to take a look to the slides or the videos if you need of any lecture that you miss. Check it. The most important thing, please remember, your exam is open only during the lecture time. It's going to open 1:30 and it's going to close 2:45. No exceptions. So if you are not in Arizona, if you are in a different time zone, please be sure to review and put an alarm or something to present your exam during the lecture time next Wednesday. Also, remember, you have an assignment. You are working in your assignment. Hopefully, you are done with that. I noticed that several people already submit the assignment, which is great. I answered some questions during the weekend, so I think people is moving forward. But if you haven't finished, just remember, also March 10 is the due date for your assignment 3. Your assignment 3, this program that you are doing with the Curator and Observer, hopefully help you or is helping you to review those patterns. You can expect questions about Observer and the Curator, open questions during your exam. So please be sure to understand the source code and the relationship between the source code and the diagram. That could be key during your exam. The open questions, the questions that have more points, more value, could be open and could be about those patterns, among other things. But be sure to review the patterns. Great idea to finish the assignment before the exam. However, as I mentioned before, you can submit your assignment after the exam. You have the full day, March 10. But if you can finish before, it could be great for you to use that as a study, right? Anyway, also, we mentioned this before, your final, April the 21. So please keep that in your agenda. And also, during the lecture time. So put an alarm or something. The proctoring, I mentioned this before, just in case that you miss it, you need the Respondos lockdown browser. So far, if I remember correctly, only 7 to 10 people around that have present the sample exam, the one that I opened to you to test your systems. So it's kind of low. I just sent an email to all the people that haven't accessed the sample exam. So if you receive an exam, if you receive an email from me today asking you to please review the sample exam, please go ahead, do it as soon as possible. Just in case you need a webcam, another computer, I don't know. If you need something, if something is not working with your laptop or with your equipment, hopefully you could have at least one day to ask your friends for a computer, a laptop, to go to the library, whatever you need. Check your system as soon as possible. You're going to have a link like this, as I mentioned before, Wednesday. So the only thing that you need to do Wednesday is having the lockdown browser, go check this link and start your exam. As soon as you can start, you can go ahead, move. Remember, when you start with the exam, you need to get the software. When you start with the exam, you are going to need to do something like this. Remember, you need an ID. Have with you your IDs, ASU ID, driver license, passport. something, the system is going to ask you for your ID. The system is going to ask you to have access to your webcam. Be sure that your webcam is working. Test the lockdown browser before, but your ID. Also, you're going to be asked to check your environment. So 1:30, before 1:30 next Wednesday, be sure that you are in a place in which you can take your exam, at least be comfortable working the next hour. And remember, no headphones. You cannot cover your ears with anything. Your phone, remove your phone from the desk. You do not want your phone over the desktop. I know that some people use the phone to check the clock and the time. Please remove the phone. Use the timing in your computer, your watch, whatever, but you cannot have the phone in the desk. Hopefully you read the instructions that I posted. I want to mention the specific of the cellular phone. It's going to be flagged as suspicious because you can use the phone for other things, communicate with people, get results, whatever. So remove anything that could be flagged as a suspicious. Just think about you are in the classroom, the same thing that you have in the classroom, nothing, scratch paper, a pen, your exam is in the computer. No electronic devices, no covering your ears, no talking. Be aware of that. I already mentioned that several people recorded talking about different things. So, closed book. I know that your quizzes are open book, your exam is closed book. Please remember that. Professor, the quizzes are open book, so I think that the exam is also open book. It's closed book. Second time that I mentioned it during the lecture. Second set of slides in which I highlight closed book. If you answer your exam and you use any resource, you are going to receive a 0 and probably an academic integrity flag. So closed book, the exam. Please remember this. Now, moving forward with the topics for your exam. I am going to make a summary of topics that I could recommend you to study, a summary of things that I think you should know, including the assignment that you are doing. I am going to mention a quick summary of the common questions that I receive from people. Maybe those questions are the same questions that you have, and maybe whatever I told you right now could help you with the exam and also with finishing your assignment. So, topics. Disclaimer, your exam includes everything from the lecture 2 until the last lecture in the previous week. The summary is just a recopilation of things, but everything from the lecture 2 to our lectures in the previous week can be in your exam. So review those lectures. What I am going to do here is just a summary of the most important topics. I cannot mention everything. Professor, this topic was not mentioned in the review. It's a topic that I didn't mention in the review, but your exam includes all the topics, lecture 2 to the previous week. And hopefully that is clear and also recorded. So review everything. What I am going to mention here, use a summary, use a selection of topics. It's not comprehensive. Now, topics. Basically, we covered these 5 topics. This is the 5 things that we review for your mint. In terms of paper, those are the 5 papers that I asked you to review. And our topics for the exam come from those papers. One way or another, for each of the papers, we review 2-3 lectures. We go into details about the topics there. So step number 1, if you have the opportunity, if you didn't do before, read the papers. Those 5 papers, material from the papers are in your exam. They are on Canvas, you can access them. Hopefully you already read it. We discussed them, but if you didn't have the opportunity to read the papers, now is a good moment. 5 papers, clear. Do you remember all of them? Hopefully, yes. From the papers, a quick summary. I am going to start with the questions that in your exam are going to be multiple choice, the easy ones. The questions that are going to be 1 to 5 points, something like that. Paper number 1, stepwise refinement. Question in your exam. Modularization is the same thing that the stepwise refinement. And it's a question, true, false. I have one false on the screen, two false on the screen. Hopefully everyone agree with that. They are not the same. What is stepwise refinement? What is modularization or modularity? What is a module? Those are questions also in your exam, multiple choice, but you need to know which one to select. Exactly. That is a very good summary, a type of modularization. We mentioned that. One thing is modularization. There are several different approaches. One of those approaches is the one that we review, but it's not the only one, and therefore the definitions are not the same. That is a very important one. It's a common question that the people fail. They are not the same. And there are other similar questions like that. We review some categories or some types of or approaches for. A common question that I ask you is if the approach that we review is the same as the concept, like stepwise is the same as modularization. Hopefully you remember, not the same, not only for this case, but for others. So what is a function? Decomposition, task, steps, quality attributes. All these concepts probably are going to be there. And as I mentioned before, 1 to 5 points in a question, multiple choice. I am not going to ask you to define something as an open question. I do not want you to think a lot about a concept and write one paragraph or more. Usually concepts are going to be multiple choice questions. You select the correct definition, you select the correct relationship, that's it. So my recommendation regarding the concept is have an idea what they are, and obviously being able to identify the difference between, for instance, a task and a step, because you can have both questions in the exam. What is a task? What is a step? And probably the multiple choice answers could be the same. So you need to select the correct one for one concept or for the other. I am not going to go ahead and give you the definition of each of these. I think if you need to review the definitions, some of them are in the slides, some of them are during our lectures in the videos, but please be sure that you read this slide and you can define all those concepts. In particular, do you remember what is software design under the context of this paper, under the context of stepwise refinement 9060? Which was the task of the designer talking about this concept? Creating classes and the relationships? How many classes and how they are connected? Maybe decide between aggregation and composition? And hopefully your answer is no. In the context of this paper, in the context of this author, software design was all about top-down approach, yes, for what? Modularization based on functionality. The decisions for the designer, the decision that you take in terms of the design of the software, how many modules, the responsibility of the modules, and how to split the modules in functions. And functions were tasks, right? And inside of the functions, you have instructions, they are steps. Split modules in tasks and define the steps for each task. Design here. We're talking about software design in structural programming. The most important thing for you to remember is software design is not always about classes and the relationship between the classes, because there are languages that are not object-oriented now and before. Software design, the first idea was to split things, to create elements and connect those elements. In this context, the elements, the functions, the connection between the function, the calls to another function. So a list of concepts for you to review. Moving forward, the next paper that we review, information hiding. Hopefully you remember the author. And again, the criteria. Do you remember that there is a difference between the criteria that we follow here and the criteria that we follow here to create a model? Which was the criteria here and which was the criteria here to create a model? Information hiding, partners. Here, the criteria was information hiding, and the definition of information hiding is the one that you put here in the chat. You hide, you put in one model, what? Things that change, things that handle information. This is the beginning of the classes that you create later with the data structure and the access methods. But again, here we are not talking yet about classes. Information hiding. And here, data, correct. In fact, that is a very good summary. Here, we create models and we split the models in functions based on functionality, responsibilities, task. Do you remember all those words? The functionality, the functional requirement, the task, the things that the software is going to do. The first criteria was according with the different things that we need to do, we create different functions, and according with similar functions, we put similar functions in the same model. Functionality. Here, data. I like the summary that you put in the chat. Functionality versus data. Create models according with functions, functionality, requirements. Create models according with things that are going to change the data in the program, in the system. Good. So things that are related, when we put together the two papers, obviously, what is information hiding, what is a data structure, things that we define, but most important, differences, difference between function and model, task and responsibility. We talk about those during the lectures. Function and model, hopefully is clear. I just mentioned both concepts. What is the difference between a function and a model? They are the same. And hopefully you remember functions are inside of models. Exactly. Good. Model. The easy way to remember a model is that it's a file, and inside of the file you have functions and you have data also, the global variables. And the functions, well, the functions are what you do to create representation programming task. A collection of tasks is a responsibility or a cheaper responsibility. The functions have inside instructions. Instructions are steps. We review that. Yeah. So the people that is participating in the chat, you have the idea. One way or another, the things that you are sharing is in the line. You are fine. Hopefully that works for everyone else. So if you're reading the chat, if you agree with that, we're moving forward. It is the same a task and a responsibility. If not, what is the difference? Because I connect function with task, but what about this guy? Responsibility is a functional requirement. Exactly, I agree with that. You put the steps inside of tasks, you put tasks together to accomplish responsibilities. And if you want to think about in terms of physical elements, the tasks are the function, the steps are the instructions inside of the functions, and the responsibilities, well, you put responsibilities inside of model, right? The collection of the functions. Yeah, responsibilities is the model, and as we discussed, the models are regarding the functions, the things that they are done, the collection of functions that are going to be in the model, but also when we review partners, they are also connected with data. You can have a model, you can have a responsibility that is all about handling the data. You have this class that is the responsible to handling the data from the students, and it's a responsibility, and it's a model. One place with all the global variables for the students, for the classes, for the professor, whatever. A subroutine is another name for a function. Remember, when we start talking here about different languages use different names for the same thing. You are familiar, obviously, with this idea of method and function. I am sure that you have listened function when you review C, C++, and moreover, functional programming, Lisp, and others. Now, even in Java, we talk about functions. Methods when you work with the object-oriented, but those are not the only things. You have procedure. Someone called procedures those methods that are void. If a method do not return anything, some languages call that method, that function, a procedure, just because cannot be a function because it's not returning anything. So instead of a method that is void, they use a different name. Predicates. If you remember, if you review Prolog or Lisp, if you have a method and the method is going to return a boolean, or you have a function and the function is going to return a boolean, the name for that function or method returning a boolean value, true or false, is a predicate, the concept. And obviously we can add routines, subroutines. Something that is important with the subroutine is we cannot put a method inside of a method in C or C++. You cannot put a method inside of a method in Java. However, there are other languages in which you can put a method, a function, inside of another function. Just like in Java, you can put a class inside of another class. In some languages, you can do that. So maybe that could make more sense with the name subroutine, like the routine inside of the routine, the method inside of the method. Again, different names because there are different ways to do this in different languages, not only Java, not only object-oriented. So routine, subroutine, procedure, predicate, function, method, all of this is one idea, the idea of the task. And they are going to be inside of modules. And if you move to object-oriented, you know your modules, well, there are going to be an element in the middle, that is the class, but your modules are going to be more like your packages, a collection of classes with a collection of methods. Good. So I think concepts, at least according with the chat, we're moving forward. You remember this. Hopefully you can answer the open multiple choice questions in less than a minute. You have 3 minutes per question, more or less. If you can answer all these open question, multiple choice questions in less than a minute, you are basically having a lot of time for the open questions, a lot of time for the program. So this is easy. Programming in the large versus programming in the small is the other paper that we review. And here, basically, we move forward to key concepts before the object-oriented. Here, we start talking about hierarchical relationship. We start talking about public and private, the scope of the things, and the work of the programmer. The difference between use coding, make something work using a particular language, and really do programming, which basically mean the important thing is not to make the computer to do something. The important thing is to put the solution in a document, the program, and be sure that another programmer, another human being is going to be able to understand my solution in the future, or even yourselves in a year after you review what you did. The programming is like writing a book. It's not only to achieve the computer to do something, is to put there in the software something that another human being will understand. That is the important part. And that is the point in which we need design, a good design, like structuring your book. A good Book is one in which you can clearly identify chapters, topics per chapter, the paragraphs, the sections. All these elements facilitate the reading. And here we introduce the idea of readability. And for readability, and maybe I am going to move to things that I didn't put in the slides, but do you remember 3 key ideas that we mentioned in order to achieve readability in our software? 3 recommendations for you as a developers. 3 things to do. And we're in the chat, yes, if you talk about a program, the sub-programs or the division of the program, well, a program is a collection of modules. So yes, you can think as a sub-program is a module in the context of this, is a sub-part or a small part of the program. Yeah, you could. Those names with sub-routine, sub-program, sub-system, sometimes it's not a good idea. This sub whatever, there is a name for that sub whatever. So it's better to use the name. I mean, are you talking about a component, or are you talking about a package, or are you talking about a module? All those things can be a sub program, depending on the language and the context. But in the context that we're describing here, yes, a sub program could be a module. We do not have any other thing, only the modules here, not very oriented yet. Okay, those ideas. Going back to my question, readability, important things that we review, and important things for you to remember, the Java guidelines, follow the guidelines, use correct names, among other things. We review that. I asked you to follow the Java docs. So guidelines, number 1, the easy one, the one that you know since you were programmers. The others, dry and keys. Please remember dry and keys. Probably something that you're going to have are examples of source code. I usually take those examples from your assignment. So a screenshot of some source code. And the question is, this is dry, this is keys, this is following the guidelines, yes or no? Or can you fix this software? 2 lines, 3 lines, 5 lines, a method. Can you please rewrite the same method, the same functionality, but following keys, dry? Can you give me the Java doc for this method, just to know that you remember the guidelines? Or fix the names in this method? Or use a set of variables, and these 5 variables, global, they are correct, yes or no? If not, please give me a recommendation. So be sure that you understand what is dry, what is keys, because in your questions, I am going to use those names without giving you the definition. So this is dry, yes or no? So you need to remember what is dry, so what the question is asking for. They could be, as I mentioned before, an open question if I ask you for a solution, an open question if I ask you to fix that. But also, there are going to be a lot of questions like that, multiple choice. As I mentioned, true, false. This is dry, yes, no, that's it. Or which of these lines are correct according with the dry principle, and you just select those that are correct. Or which of these are correct according with the keys principle, and maybe there is a set of methods, different versions of the same methods, and you just select the method that is correct according with that principle. So again, you need to understand the principle, review the examples in the slides, be sure that you check your own code, and if you have any question, let us know. But multiple choice, and maybe one open question is there, like, help me to fix this. And as I mentioned before, if I ask you for open questions, it's going to be a small method, 5 lines, 6 lines, something very, very small. My goal is not to have you writing a lot of things. It's just 5 lines, fix this according with the keys or whatever, just to be sure that you understand what is wrong there. Yeah, usually open questions are going to have more value than the open. The open have more value than the multiple choice. How many points? it's going to depend on your exam. There is a pool with questions, and the multiple choice have 1, 3, 5 in value. I'm talking about points. But the open ones could be 5, 10, 12. Again, I am just mentioning numbers just for give you a reference. But you can have an open question that is twice the value or of one. Two multiple choice is equal to one open or more. So it's going to be a random set of questions. I am sure that you're going to have questions that are 1 point, 2 points, but several of them are going to be 5. That is going to be kind of the common thing. And for the open, you can go to 15 points in one question. One particular question is really heavy. Good. My recommendation, as I mentioned before, you can go back and forward with the questions. For the multiple choice, that probably are going to be the first question that you have. Again, it's randomly, but just because you have more multiple choice, I am assuming that you're going to have at the beginning multiple choice, just statistically. You can answer those. Be sure to use a small period of time. Again, you have 3 minutes per question, but the idea, your goal could be 1 or 2 minutes with the multiple choice. Maybe at the first time, reach the open questions, spend time with the open questions, and you can always go back and fix whatever you did with the multiple choice. Just remember, every time that you answer a question, we record what you answer. So just be aware that whatever you answer, if your time run out and you are put off the exam, that your exam is submitted, whatever you answer is the thing that we're going to grade. So be sure that you put in each question, not a random answer, but the answer that maybe is the one that is going to be graded if you do not have time or the opportunity to go back. So the strategy that you follow in your exam is up to you. Just remember, the open questions have a highest value than the multiple choice. Good. So here we start with accessibility, and I just want to make sure that if you have a question in the exam that asks about accessibility, we're talking basically about public and private. If we talk about hierarchy, and we're going to talk a lot, we're talking about relationship between things. And from here, we move to the other paper, and here is we start all about object-oriented programming. And object-oriented programming, for sure, things that you're going to have in the exam. All those concepts. There are more, but at least my recommendation, be sure that you can explain those concepts. In particular, something new here is, what is a collaborator? And I'm mentioning this in the context of this paper, right? We're talking about what is a collaborator in the context of object-oriented programming, because we reviewed that concept with the object-oriented thinking paper. So a collaborator is a model, a method, a class, an instruction, and a step. When we talk about collaborators, what are we talking about? Classes. Good. Hopefully you agree with the chat. Collaborators. We start talking about collaboration when we introduce the classes and the objects. Collaboration is, or collaborator is any class that is connected with other classes collaborating with that class. You establish collaborations with relationships. And then we start talking about the different relationships. And here, for sure, question in your exam, which are the relationships that we can have between classes? And hopefully you remember inheritance, composition, aggregation, and so on, right? Okay, you have it. So when we talk about relationship, we're talking about all those things. And those concepts are going to be here with the multiple choice question, with the theoretical question, with the definition of things, like as a concept. What is the difference between aggregation and composition? It's a question, multiple choice. But if you read the question and you have the answer, you need to have a background in terms of, okay, which one I am going to select? What is the difference between aggregation and composition? And I am not talking about the color of the diamond. I am talking about the meaning of the relationship between two classes. Do you remember aggregation versus composition? What will you select as the difference? And you can put this in different ways. Again, it's going to be a multiple choice answer. So the only thing is you need to remember, well, the big difference is the null. One, the relationship is mandatory, in the other is optional. In one, the variable can be null, in the other cannot be null. As far as you remember this strong connection between not a strong connection, they should be connected always. It could be the case that this is not connected because the connection is null. As far as you remember that. Moreover, which one is what, right? The one that is okay with the null is aggregation, or the one that is okay with the null is composition. As far as you remember which one is what, and that is the difference, I think we are going to be okay answering the correct question, the correct answer, selecting the correct answer in your exam. Yes, aggregation is the one that is not. Remember, you are going to aggregate. So if you are going to aggregate, it's because something was not here before. You are going to do the aggregation, but this guy was okay without this thing that I am aggregating. Composition, something that is composed, is these two guys were born together, so they are a composition of things. Not null versus null. Yeah, that is the correct thing. That is another word that is going to be there in your exam. Yeah, is the coupling strong or weak, loose couplet or not. Good. Again, I am mentioning probably the common errors in previous exams or in quizzes, according with my experience, but all the relationships can be in your exam. Similar question, the difference between realization and generalization, for instance. Hopefully you remember realization, generalization. Both are related with inheritance, but they are not the same. And the question again is, what is the difference between a generalization between A and B and a realization between A and B? And well, multiple choice options. I am going to mention level now. But moving to the other, do we remember the difference between generalization, specialization, and realization, right? What is the difference in one word, in one sentence? Well, that is a very good definition for generalization and specialization. Yes, generalization when we create the parent, specialization when we create childs, and realization, yes, realization from the interfaces. So again, generalization and specialization, we're talking about classes, childs or parent, but they are classes. Realization is a special case of inheritance. We're talking about interfaces. And obviously, another question there, multiple choice, is the difference between a class and an interface. Hopefully, it's an easy question because it's something that you know since you learned to program with Java. So it's a question that could be there for some of you. Hopefully, it's something easy to answer. 1 or 3 points that you can get easily. Good. So levels. Do you remember that we talk about relationship, but in particular, we mentioned a hierarchical relationship, a hierarchy. What can we do to create levels? What can we do to create a hierarchy in object-oriented programming? Which is the relationship one that helps us with that? Not yet. That is the reason because I am explaining this. We are not talking yet about layers in terms of the architecture. Not yet. Here is only about classes and the relationship between classes. So we are going to move to architecture later, and we're going to talk about that meaning of layers. But here, levels between classes. What can we do, or which relationship establish levels between classes? Yes. Inheritance. And that is a very good point, is we haven't reviewed yet architecture officially. We haven't reviewed yet officially model view controller or other patterns for architecture. We're going to do that in the next week, but not yet. So be careful that your answers are all about the things that we have reviewed. I am not going to ask you about model view controller. I am not going to ask you about layers, the architectural model, not yet. In your final, there are going to be questions about it. But here, the most complex thing that we review, classes and the relationship between classes. So the context that we have is used for the levels, inheritance, which inheritance you define different levels, a hierarchy between your classes, or your classes in your interfaces. Good. Okay. Bonus points. Do you remember what is linking? It do not exist in Java, but exists in other languages. In particular, if you have worked with C, C++, you have noticed that one, linking. Exactly. Exactly. Connection in execution time. And the only thing that I mentioned here, the only important thing is, it is not the same connections or relationships between elements in the design level. All these relationships and connections, even levels that we're talking about in the design, and other things like connections, linking that happen with the libraries in runtime, with the libraries in compilation time, between the different files of the same system, when you connect them, not the source code, but the object code. In C, C++, if you work with that, do you remember you have different classes or different modules, you compile them, different files, and each file is compiled, the source code into object code, and then you need to connect that object code. You need to connect all the different files that you compile in one executable, and that is linking. Or you need to connect your executable runtime with the DLLs if you're working with Windows, and that is another connection. But they are not the same relationship that we review, that we're reviewing in the design level. Anyway, object-oriented, talking about the relationship, a lot of questions. And probably if you can only study one thing, only one, this could be my recommendation. Obviously, you are not going to get 100 over 100 in the exam, but at least you're going to get something that could be competitive to maybe perform better in the next one and get a C or something in the class. One topic, probably the most important, the one that I recommend you to not miss, the relationship between classes. What is the difference between each of these symbols? I am talking about the lines, the diamonds, the triangle in white, the solid line versus the dashed line. This picture in particular, all these relationships, play with these relationships in the project that you are doing or you did in the past. Class diagram. Be sure to be able to translate one of these, a combination of this, to source code, and be sure that you are able to read source code and create or imagine the correct class diagram for that source code. I am talking about global variables versus local variables, creating an object global or in the constructor versus creating an object in a method. Obviously, inheritance, extend versus implements. And I can continue. Obviously, all this is going to end with patterns. The capability of understanding with these lines what happened later in this diagram. So diagrams like this. I am showing you several patterns, not only the ones that we review, but be sure that you are able to put together these things and figure out what is happening in these diagrams. Obviously, in particular, the diagrams that we reviewed before, the observer, the singleton, and the decorator. Yes, question in the chat. You can use the reflexive association in the singleton. Yes, just remember, important thing. You can have this one as a singleton, and you can notice that I have the variable here. So option number one. Option number two, remember that you can have the class, whatever is the name of the class. You can have empty the variable part. Obviously, you will need the methods, whatever they are. And instead of the variable, you can have the reflexive relationship. The relationship, association, or aggregation, whatever, you are going to have something like this. So remember, you can have the line, the relationship, or you can have the variable, but not both. Just be careful with that. Only one. And this applies for the singleton, but also applies for any other diagram that you are doing. This is one of the things that I mention a lot when we review your class diagrams. Do not put both the variable and the relationship, only one, whatever you want. Well, I don't know, not use the reflexive, the relationship, just to be sure, if you have a class, whatever is the name, and inside of that class, you have a variable, and that type is the same of the class. Kind of recursion, but it's not recursion because these are not methods. The name for that is this reflexive. So is that connection. And the classical example in the question in the chat is regarding the singleton, because remember, this is the case of the singleton. The singleton have an instance of the same class inside. So that is the reason because I am mentioning this is like this. Reflective aggregation versus reflective composition. The reflective is that you have inside of the same class. That is, this makes the arrow connecting the two classes. Now, the variable is local or global. If the variable is global, like maybe in this example, this variable is outside of the methods, what you have is an aggregation, right? Remember, you are going to have the diamond because the variable is global. So usually it's going to be the diamond and it's going to be reflexive, like in the case of the singleton. However, if you have a class and the class have the variable, but the variable is not global, it's a variable inside of one of the methods, what you're going to have is a reflection, but the reflection is going to be not an aggregation. When you have local variables, it's using association, so it's going to be a reflective association. Again, the reflection is because you have a variable from the same class. Whether it is aggregation or association or composition, the same rules apply that when you have the variable from other class. Well, we haven't reviewed adapter, so that is a topic that we're going to cover later. But yeah, the class diagram for the decorator and the class diagram from the adapter is very, very similar. So we're going to review that the difference between the decorator and the adapter is more about the semantic, not about the structure. But that is something that we're going to do later. So don't worry about the adapter, not yet. No, because the main is a static method. Remember, something that I maybe didn't mention enough, but what you have is in your classes, if the variable is global, the variable exists for the object. You are showing the relationship between the object, even though it is the class diagram, but you're showing those things that are going to affect your objects. So a global variable is an object that is going to have another object or is going to be connected with another object in the same channel. When you create the variable, like we do in the main, we're creating an object and the object is created in this static method main. Usually we do not show any reflection because it's not the class, the one that have the object. It's just an object in this static method that in particular is the main that is going to be created, use one, but not an attribute or not using something. If we want to be very, very specific, yes, the main is using an object from the class, but that will mean that all the classes with main are reflexive. And that is true in Java, but it's more like an error in Java. If you have worked with C++, you remember that that is a different thing. The main is in a different place. So you do not put a reflection just because the main have an object from the class, because that is not considered reflective. And similar rule could apply with any other static method. It's going to happen. It's not something happening for all the objects in that class. Good. Okay, guys. So very, very important here. I am showing you several diagrams. These diagrams come from different patterns. Some of them we're going to review later. But again, the question that you could have is, can you identify among these the decorator? And well, I can create crazy diagrams for you. I can create a lot of connections and whatever. But the important thing is that I need you to remember the key features in the patterns that we review. And for instance, talking about the decorator, I need you to remember the inheritance and the connection with the diagram. Obviously, you can identify that here and here, and in this one too. So there are 3 patterns, all have that feature. Again, if you select any of those, I am going to be, okay, that is the feature for the decorator. I am not going to ask you yet to identify versus the decorator and other patterns that are similar, because we need to talk about other features. But for the decorator, remembering that, for the observer, for the singleton, remember the features, the characteristics, not only in the diagram, but more important in the source code. Yeah, that could be the summary. Inheritance plus aggregation in one class. Yes. So talking about that, obviously also multiple choice questions. Something that is going to be there is about the gang of 4 patterns, the GOF patterns. Remember, there are 3 categories. Something that I could ask you is about the difference between the categories. Which are the creational patterns? What is the problem that the creational pattern address? Or similar question for the structural patterns. What is the problem or problems that the structural patterns are addressing? Or the behavioral patterns? Give me an example of a behavioral pattern, or give me an example of creational pattern, or give me an example of structural patterns. Which of the followings are creational or structurals or behavioral? I need you to remember the 3 categories. I need you to remember the difference between the categories. For instance, the creational patterns are for what? Exactly. It's kind of very simple. Creational pattern, creating what? Objects. Not classes, objects. Remember, the singleton is not about how to create classes. The singleton is about one and only one object. Tricky question, but Please be careful, read your exam carefully. Similar with the structural and similar with behavioral, and you can give me at least one example per category, at least, right? For some of the categories more, but at least you have one in each. And for that one, my recommendation, the source code, review the source code. I'm not asking you for memorize all the patterns in the category. I'm not going to ask you anything that is related with memorization. One, remember the difference between the categories. That is something that we review. Like I asked before, creation. Creation. Just remember creation of what? What are we talking about? And just remember what is the category for the patterns that you know. The category of the observer, the category of the singleton, the category of the decorator. So I can ask you, what is the category of the decorator? Or I can ask you, give me an example of one pattern in the category of structural. One way or another, you remember decorator, that is something that we review. That's it. I am not going to ask you about the bridge or the facade or the adapter yet. That is something that I am going to do later in the final exam. Questions about the patterns that we review, the one that you should know, and you have the slides and the lectures, but you do not need to memorize all the names or all the pictures. No. That is correct. You do not need to worry for the patterns that we haven't touched. So you do not need to worry for the adapter, like I mentioned before, or the factory. Those are the next patterns that I want to review. In the same way, you do not need to worry about model view controller. We're going to review it. You do not need to worry about Blackboard or layers. We need to review it. So not in your exam, not yet. Good. Your exam, I assume that I can ask you questions about programming with Java. I am talking about the open questions now. For the open questions, and well, to be honest, for the open questions and some multiple choice are going to be related with this. So I am assuming that you're familiar with Java, the things that you use for your assignments. If you complete your assignments yourselves, you're ready for the exam. Java is some data structures, linked list, and is graphical user interface, basically. That is a big summary. But again, if you did your assignments, you can put a check there. If not, if you receive help, if you do not remember things, if you use some source code from some place, but you do not really understand the code, it happened to work, my recommendation is you have time to review why that code is working or what elements you are using there. Review the code, review your assignments. If you understand your assignments, if you did your assignments, you're fine. If not, please study that also. I mentioned this before. I am asking you to do coding, and for that coding, obviously, I am expecting dry and keys. Unless it's specific in the question, I am not asking you for Javadoc, unless the question asks for the Javadoc. Some of you are going to have questions about Javadoc, but not all the questions need a Javadoc. Mostly of the questions, they are going to ask for a method or they are going to ask for a class. You do not need to include the Javadoc. I am not asking for that. Again, unless the question mentioned, please put the Javadoc. So read careful. Java, everything in graphics using Swing. I am assuming that you're familiar with Paint component, which include the class graphics. I am going to use these classes to ask things, maybe draw something, paint something, modify something, and I am going to give you a partial class or nothing, depending on the question, but I am going to be using this method. I am going to use this class. Similar way, the widgets, JBottom, JLabel, at least. I'm not going to ask you for JTables or something complex like that, but widgets for sure. Add a bottom and click in the bottom, listeners. Again, things that you already did, please, if you didn't do it, if you didn't feel comfortable with what you did, review it. and the patterns. And in particular, I am talking about, please review for the Java util, the observer. Some questions are going to ask you to use the Java framework with observer and observable. You can use the Java in some questions, or you can create everything by yourselves. There are questions in which the question mentioned use the observer, and you can do it in whatever way you want. My recommendation, if you remember this, you can save a lot of time, because you do not need to provide the source code for the observable or the source code for the observer. You can just import the package and use it. Again, user recommendation. Read carefully the question. Some questions ask for do it in any way you can. Other questions ask for a particular way to implement things. It is random. Probably half of you are going to be asked to use the library. Half of you are going to be asked to do without the library. The only thing is, you know, the randomness. Like if you were in the classroom and one of you received one exam and your partner have a different one, something similar online, not everybody have the same question. Plotting the graph. Well, plotting the graph is kind of the same question here. It's basically using the paint component and the graphic. I received several questions about it during the weekend, and I have several people that accomplished the goal. So I am sure that by now you noticed that basically the plot is here and it's not so complex. Hopefully you finish in a couple of hours. Thinking about that, and I want to finish with that, the review. Be sure to finish your assignment and review your assignment, how the assignment is working. In particular, by now, my expectation is if I give you this bunch of boxes, can you figure out the connection between those boxes? The connections I am talking about, the UML class diagram connections, inheritance, association, aggregation, composition, realization. Can you correctly connect these classes according with what you did in your assignment? I am glad to read yes, because that could be one question in your exam. Obviously, in your exam, can you tell me what is the best relationship? What relationship should exist between main and listener? And that is your question, is I have these classes, they represent your assignment, and your question is main and listener. The connection is multiple choice, and obviously as an option I put all the relationship that you know. So the only thing that you need to do is click in the one that is the correct one, and is realization correct. Obviously, I can ask you for the name, or I can just show you the different pictures of the arrows with different heads or with different lines. You should identify that one as a realization, and you should identify that one like the correct arrowhead. Moreover, that the arrowhead should point the listener. Something that I am going to do is to give you the source code of the main, like I did for some assignment. If I show you the source code of the main, could you imagine the relationship between the main and JBottom? Obviously, if I just ask you about the relationship, the main and the JBottom, it's tricky because the relationship can be from composition, aggregation, or use association. The three of them could be possible. However, if I give you the source code, if I show you the source code of the main, looking at the source code and checking that maybe there are no global variables, or there are global variables, but there are no constructor, or there are global variables and there are a constructor. Checking the source code, my goal is that you are able to identify the correct relationship between those two classes. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that is the one. And again, multiple choice, all the relationship, just check the one that is the correct one. If I told you that all these classes are creating a decorator pattern. And if I told you that drawable is the parent of the full family, what is the relationship or relationships? You can imagine a question with multiple choice and you can select more than one. Which are the relationships or relationship, whatever, parenthesis S, between decorator plot and drawable? Again, those classes are creating a decorator, drawable is the parent of everything, decorator plot, you can imagine is the parent of the parent of the decorators. Which of the following relationships apply to the relationship between those two classes? And hopefully you agree with that one, two relationships, and hopefully you remember which two. Realization, I need to give you details, but yeah, realization aggregation or inheritance aggregation. Things like that. For the source code of this, hopefully you already have this. A challenge for you. What if I told you that in the project that you are doing, I want to do the following, and I am not changing the specification for your assignment. Your assignment is, as I described before, this is just for you to think about it. If you already finished your assignment and I ask you, can you add a class evaluator? That is the name of my class. I want that class to be a singleton. So I am asking you to create a class with the name evaluator, and I am asking you to make that class a singleton. Can we make evaluator to get access to the data that is being created by the source? What could be the best way to have this class evaluator having access to the same data that the panels have access? Observe, I could agree with that. Can we have a class evaluator that is a singleton and is also an observer? In this case, an observer of source, yes or no? Can you imagine the source code of this class evaluator? Yes. Finally, can you make all these panels to draw a line in a red color, showing the average of the data, and the one that is going to draw that line in the panels is a evaluator guy. So again, the panels are there and the panels are doing these plots, but there is this guy, evaluator. And this evaluator guy is a singleton, is the only one in the full system. And he is an observer of the data, so he is aware of the data. He is doing an average of the data. So he knows the average of all the data. And I want him to go to the panel and draw the line. He's a singleton, he's an observer, and I want him to draw a line. How do we do that? It's not a decorator because it's not going to decorate. Think about this. Inside of the panel, you have this plot that is decorated. So think about the panel like this is my panel. Inside of the panel, I have this something, whatever, that have decorations, whatever. So this is the guy that is decorated, the plot. The panel have that plot. And there is this guy, the evaluator, that is going to go and is going to check whatever, and is going to draw a line. It's not a decorator, it's not part of the decorations, it's just a guy that is going to work with the panel and is going to go and put a red line. More details. This guy or this guy. Could you agree with me that any of those two, depending on your programming, the panel that have everything, or the initial object, the one with the graphic, with or without decoration, that is another issue. What if one of these guys, the panel or the graphic, simple, open the door for the evaluator to draw the line? What if I establish a relationship between these two? I am the panel, so I am the one that have this plot with decoration or not, but I am the panel, I have the graphic. Can I ask that guy, the evaluator, to come here and draw your line? Two things, relationship between plot panel and evaluator. If I told you that the easy way to connect them is plot panel, call a method in the evaluator sending the graphic association. Plot panel is going to call evaluator. What is going to do to call evaluator? Can you imagine inside the plot panel one line in any place? Could you agree that in any place in the panel, you can call the class and they get the instance and the draw method, and the only thing that you need to do is to send to the draw method the graphic? So maybe that call could be in the paint component. And when you send the graphic, the evaluator can use the graphic to put a line in whatever place. Are you asking me to create a class evaluator that is a singleton, that is an observer of the source and is connected with panel or simple plot, with plot panel or with simple plot, whatever you want, both cases work, use with an association? And notice that the arrow is pointing to evaluator. A method is being called in evaluator. If you can do those three things with only one class, and with that, draw this red line. And obviously it's going to be drawing all of them because you are applying that to the class. So all the objects from that class are going to behave in that way. If you understand what I am talking about, the class is an observable, it's going to receive a call from a method from the graphic, it's going to be observing data, that is a singleton. To be clear, it do not need to be a singleton. It could be an object in a different way. The solution that I am asking you to do is more for practice, not because it's mandatory in this case. But if you understand the solution that I am talking about, if you read the diagram and my lines, and you can connect that with source code, I think you are almost ready for the exam. If not, you have time to ask questions and maybe practice. Okay, guys, that is what I have. Any question? Yeah, that is what hopefully is the message here. We have a common vocabulary and just talking about these abstract words, observer, singleton, etc. You are understanding a lot of lines of code. If that is what is happening, we are moving forward. Okay, guys, I want to stop here. Any question, please send me an email. Remember, next lecture, there is not a lecture, use your exam. Good luck with that. See you.